a man, such a man, such a man. He's a real man's man. He's a man, such a man, such a man. He's a real man's man. He's a real man's man.
Welcome to ULTRASPECTICUS, a journey through classic Ultraman. Ultraman premiered on July 17, 1966 on TBS. No, not that TBS, Tokyo Broadcasting System. It was helmed by special effects icon Eiji Tsuburaya. Now for those who don't know, this is the man responsible for bringing a little something called Godzilla to life, as well as Mothra, Ghidorah, and countless other big Japanese monsters. Eventually, he created his own company, Tsuburaya Productions, or as it's called today for short, Supro. It was the 1960s and the advent of TV was in full effect, and Tsuburaya was helping to make the transition of kaiju from the big screen to the small screen with his first series, Ultra Q. The first official series in the Ultra franchise, but as I mentioned last time, I'll be skipping it as it has less to do with Ultramen and acted more of a mystery sci-fi story of the week. A great deal like The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits. Ultra Q also contributed to the monster boom of the 1960s and was a monstrous television hit. Pun intended. Toys of monsters were selling like hotcakes and business was booming, and TBS wanted a new series from Tsuburaya post-haste. They wanted this next one to A, focus entirely on monsters, B, include a heroic character to aid humanity against said monsters, and C, they wanted this series to be in color unlike its predecessor. Color TV was becoming the new big thing at the time. TBS wanted to ride this wave of success and build a continuing series to introduce, what else, more kaiju. Tsuburaya and writer Tetsuo Kinjo began putting together the basic premise for this new show. A group was created to deal with creatures and strange occurrences every week, originally called the Scientific Investigation Agency, or SIA. The initial concept was dubbed Red Man. The titular hero was the last of its kind who comes to Earth and joins with a member of the SIA, acting as its human host. Production designer Toru Narita created the hero to look more humanoid as opposed to monstrous, closer to what most would envision a superhero to be, with some ideas from Tsuburaya and Kinjo thrown in. TBS approved it, and Redman was later renamed Ultraman. TBS also wanted this show to be one they could sell to American audiences, and sure enough, the same year Ultraman debuted, it was snatched up for distribution in America, where the dubbed version ran in syndication well into the mid-1980s. This is how I and several other 80s kids saw Ultraman for the first time. Well, enough backstory, let's get to the episodes and start the journey off right. And before we go any further, I should point out that if I'm butchering the names of any of the person, places, or things here, in the grand scheme of things it doesn't matter, but if you think I'm wrong, you can post in the comments as to correct me. Okay? Okay. One thing to point out is that the monster of the week is name-dropped at the end of every intro. This would become one of the more iconic things about Ultraman for years to come. Our first episode is Ultra Operation Number 1. We're introduced to the SSSP, the Science Special Search Party. With branches all over the world, including Japan, Paris, Brazil, and even America, their job is to investigate strange anomalies, occurrences, and protect Earth from invading space aliens. Speaking of which, a big blue orb falls into a lake. One of the members of the SSSP, Shin Hayata, was following said orb, and before he can find it, collides with a different red orb. He's absorbed into it, and inside we see a mysterious being who says he's an alien from Nebula M78.
君は一体何者だ
M78 星雲の宇宙人だ。
M78 星雲の宇宙人
そうだ、遠い宇宙からベムラーを宇宙の墓場に運ぶ途中、ベムラーに逃げ出されて、それを追って地球に来た。
ベムラー
宇宙の平和を乱す悪魔のような怪獣だ。 申し訳ないことをした早田隊員その代わり私の命を君にあげよう
君の命を君はどうなるんだ
君と一同体になるならそして地球の平和のために働きたい
これは何だ
ベータカプセル
ベータカプセル
困った時にこれを使うのだそうすると
どうなる
心配することはない
The SSSP, or the crew as I'm going to call them for short, arrive on the scene, but by the time they do, the orb explodes. Suddenly, the giant monster from that blue orb from earlier rises up out of the lake. Space monster Bemular. Without explaining everything, eventually Hayata uses the beta capsule to transform into Ultraman and battles Bemular.
M78 星雲の宇宙人からその命を託された早田隊員ベーターカプセルで宇宙人に変身したマッハ5のスピードで空を飛び強力なエネルギーであらゆる敵を粉砕する不死身の男となったのだそれゆけ我らのヒーロー
As he battles, we soon see that the light on his chest begins to blink red. Wait a minute, where did that thing come from? He didn't have it when he transformed. This will become known as the color timer, a longtime staple of the show, meaning that he's almost out of energy and must hurry to defeat the monster of the week. If Ultraman depletes all of his energy, he could possibly die. Apparently, TBS asked Tsuburaya to include this color timer at the very last minute, as the hero seemed too invincible at the time and needed a handicap or Achilles heel to build drama and or suspense. Ultraman eventually wins the battle with his signature move, the Spacium Beam. Spacium is said to come from the Japanese pronunciation of the term space ray. Anyway, Ultraman takes his leave, and then Hayata runs up to his teammates. Typical Clark Kent fashion. Just as soon as all the action is done, our mild-mannered protagonist shows up. Hayata tells them that this mystery alien saved him, and when they ask his name, Hayata says he doesn't have one. So he comes up with Ultraman right on the fly.
彼って親しそうに言うけど一体名前は何て言うんだ
なんかないよ
よせやい習志野ゴンベイなんてあるもんか
そうだなじゃあウルトラマンってのはどうだ
ウルトラマン
そうウルトラマン
That sounds like a fucking franchise.
Well, I should probably introduce the crew before we move on. Hayata you've met, aka Ultraman. Sometimes called Ultraman Hayata to differentiate. Akiko Fuji is the communications officer. She's not your average damsel in distress, as she comes to rescue the men more often than not. But she does need saving too every now and then. Her character was supposedly added at the last minute to include a female on the team. Daisuke Arashi is the marksman of the crew. He often wields a two-handed badass blaster called the Spider Shot. He can run in head first without thinking, but his heart is in the right place. Mitsuhiro Ide is the brains of the crew. Though he's nervous and has somewhat of a low self-esteem, he makes some amazing weapons and gadgets to help out the crew, as we'll see down the line. Isamu Hoshino is the junior member of this crew. He often gets into trouble or spots the invading aliens before anyone else, and no one believes him because he's a kid. Believe me, that happens more often than not. Captain Toshio Muramatsu, or Cap as he's often called, the head honcho and the most level-headed of the group. He's tough but fair. A former astronaut who is willing and able to fend off any and all alien attacks. Each team member comes equipped with a super gun, which they use to blast the giant monsters, and each come with several attachments like flares or special rounds. The crew gets around in the jet VTOLs, their usual mode of transportations. When not flying around, they also use special submarines. Okay, that's enough of that. I better stop before we have to turn this into the arsenal. In episode 2, Shoot the Invaders, a UFO is spotted over Japan, and when the crew investigates, they discover people frozen solid in place. They're then attacked by Zoidberg, Alien Baltan.
Hooray for me! Hooray for Zoidberg!
Eventually, Hayata discovers what Baltan is doing here, in case you couldn't guess.
嵐君無事だったのか
君の宇宙語は分かりにくい。だから我々はこの男の脳髄を借りて 君たちの言葉を使う。
君たちは何名いるのか。
20億3000万ほどです。
Originally, Baltans just wanted to repair their ship, but decided to take over this planet instead. We also realized, thanks to Cap, what Spacium, Ultraman's signature move, also does. It's more or less the alien's kryptonite.
キャプテン、何か方法はないんですか？
スペシウムだ。
スペシウム？
火星にある物質はそれなんだ。
地球にはないんですか？
だが、あるいは彼ならば。
彼？誰のことですか？
隼人さん！
Ultraman then uses his, X-ray vision to discover the microscopic ship of the Baltan. He guides the ship away from Earth, and, did Ultraman just kill over 2 billion aliens? Well, I'm sure they were all as evil as the big one, but still, wow. Dark. In episode 3, Science Patrol Move Out, Fuji and Hoshino investigate a disturbance near an old castle. Strange sounds could be heard from the castle, and earthquakes begin to happen as a power plant is destroyed. The culprit is revealed to be transparent monster Miraganda, a monster driven underground 500 years ago. It would have stayed dormant until workers installed electrical power lines, which it fed off of and now wants more. Eventually they figure out where it'll strike next.
よし、第三火力発電所付近の住民には避難命令を出してもらう。はい。それから井出君。はい。防衛隊にも連絡して発電所の周囲を固めるんだ。オーケー。ブイトンの燃料は確かめたらな。オーケー。大丈夫。
Hoshino tries to take out this monster alone, but fails.
星野君。
ウルトラマン、狙うをやっつけてくれよ。
So Hayata tells Arashi to look after him and slips away to become Ultraman. Hayata finds a lot of reasons to slip away in this series.
あ、ウルトラマンだ。
星野くん、ウルトラマンが来てくれたのよ。
君が呼んだから来てくれたんだよね。
In episode 4, 5 seconds before the big explosion, a rocket carrying 6 atomic bombs on its way to Jupiter, I don't want to ask what they need nukes on Jupiter for, had an accident and fell into the Pacific. One of the bombs detonated and caused a huge tidal wave. Cap tells the crew that 4 bombs have been recovered, but 1 is still missing. At the same time, a new monster appears, primordial amphibian Ragan. This Ragan has been mutated by one of the atomic bombs going off. That sounds familiar. Somehow this thing has the last bomb attached to it, so they can't attack without triggering it. Even worse, it heads to the resort where Fuji and Hoshino are staying. Hayata eventually becomes Ultraman and is able to blast him without setting off the nuke. Grabs the bomb and goes into space just before it explodes in his face. Ouch. It's okay. He got better.
ハヤトさん。ウルトラマンはしないね、ハヤトさん。
そう。大丈夫だよ。彼は不死身だよ。ん？
In episode 5, The Secret of the Miraganda, a strange green fluid comes to life and kills several people. The crew is brought in to check out these deaths. At the scene of the crimes, they find the same green fluid all over the place. Turns out the victims were part of a research team, and one of the scientists' inventions is missing.
オイリス島で採集した植物が温室から消えてるんです。
オイリス島のもの？
ああ、これがその写真です。
ミロガンダ。
After analyzing the green fluid, they discover it's chlorophyll mixed with plant and animal fluid. It's also radioactive. The one doing the killing, which is revealed to be a carnivorous plant, seems to want revenge on the science team for taking the Miraganda from its native soil.
Hamaguchi さん、あなたが足を抱え込まれた食虫植物もその花と同じ川の流れに沿って生えてたんですね。
ええ。
その前には食虫植物には出会わなかったんですか？
ええ。
The crew stands guard until the plant monster attacks Arashi. Instead of shooting the damn thing, they pull it off him. Then they shoot it. It falls into the water and seems to be done for, but it soon reappears in the city, now giant-sized. Its official name is called Mysterious Plant Green Monse. Arashi is blasted with pollen and the others open fire. Hayata slips away and transforms into Ultraman, who shows up to burn it down. In episode 6, the Coast Guard Command, Hoshino is playing with some friends by the sea and they see some cocoa beans being unloaded off a supply boat. One of his friends sees something in the water, a monster. But no one else sees it, so they don't believe him. An old sea captain hears Hoshino and his friends talking about the monster and tells them it may be a Gesura, a lizard that lives in South America that loves cocoa beans and eats insects and pests.
ゲスラは水の中にも住むことのできる両生類じゃからな。
Now they start to think the monster is real and they wonder what it could be doing in Japan. The crew figures out that Gesser's weakness is cocoa beans thanks to Brazil HQ and learn where the next cocoa bean shipment is so they'll know where it strikes next. Hayata gets buried in the rubble during an attack and drops his beta capsule. The others want to go help him, but they can't. They draw his attention with their super guns while Hayata reaches for his capsule and transforms. Ultraman saves the crew car before they're trampled. He tosses Gesser around and tries to break off its antenna. Then he just flies off and comes right back. Wait, what the hell? They take the fight into the drink. Ultraman rips off its antenna and Gesser sinks into the sea. In episode 7, The Blue Stone of Bharati, a meteor falls to Earth and all SSSP search parties from Turkey and India branches go missing. Paris HQ asks Japan to check out where it landed. When they do reach the point, a strange barrier is seen in front of them, a wall of light. They have no choice but to fly over it and descend. A magnetic beam pulls them down to the ground and they crash. Suddenly a giant subterranean beast rises up and attacks the VTOL. Oh crap, it's a graboid!
おい、早く上がってこい。 壁はこいつのせいだったんだ。しまった。俺のスパイだ。これやろ。引け。はい。
They get away and find the city of Baradi, a legendary city many believe doesn't exist. Jim, a member of the SSSP Paris branch, talks to the locals in their native tongue to ascertain what's going on. They then meet the ruler of Baradi named Shartham. She says she's an Esper, which is a gift passed down in her family, and that's how she's able to understand them. She says long ago all the citizens had this ability, but because of the monster named Antlar, the city has become cut off. No one could leave. Those who did were killed by Antlar. It seems it doesn't just attack the city because of their god Noah, the one from the Ark. She takes them to a statue of their god, and it looks just like Ultraman. It holds a blue stone that protects the city. The crew surmise that 5,000 years ago, Ultraman's ancestor also protected Earth from alien threats.
ノアの神です。この青い石がこの町をアントラーから守っているのです。
あの石がなぜだろう。
一種の魔除けかもしれん。
ノアは宇宙人だったのか。
5000年の昔、ウルトラマンの先祖は地球上に現れ、その時もやはり人類の平和のために戦っていたのか。
Just then, Antlar begins to attack the city. I guess that stone just stopped working. They blast him with their super guns, and Antlar uses his magnetism to take them away. One of the villagers tries to attack Antlar, but Hayata gets them to safety and transforms. Of course, the Queen and the others kneel, thinking their god has returned. Ultraman tries a Spacian beam, but it doesn't work. Shartham takes the blue stone from the statue and tells the crew to give it to Ultraman. Cap tosses it at Antlar, blowing it to smithereens. The villagers continue to kneel before their supposed god. Oh, please no, I don't deserve your praise. You're probably thinking of my dad or maybe my superior, who did this a long time before I got here. Gotta go. In Episode 8, The Lawless Monster Zone, a volcanic eruption occurred years ago and an advance party was sent to investigate it. No one was heard from, so the crew was called in to check it out. Meanwhile, we see two monsters duking it out. Red King, a dinosaur-esque monster, battles Chandra, a bat-like monster. Red King gains the upper hand and wins this battle. A third monster appears from the underground, Magular. The crew and the VTOL spot the battle and try not to provoke the monsters.
キャップ、ロケット砲一発で奴の立てっぱら叩き込んでやりましょうか。
やめるんだ。
しかしね、キャップ。
島には4人の人間がいるんだ。下手に手を出して暴れられでもしたらどうするんだ。
はい。
When they find signs of life, they discover their transceivers aren't working. Nobody can contact anyone on this island. One of the monsters from before appears, and Hayata throws a napalm grenade at it to distract it. He ends up slipping and falling into a gorge, losing his beta capsule in the process. Meanwhile, the others find a little monster called Pigmon, who isn't hostile and runs away. They mark it with a balloon bomb, yes, a balloon bomb, which literally attaches a balloon to it, and they can spot it and follow it. They find the only remaining scientist barely alive. It seems Pigmon was helping to keep him alive while the big monsters were fighting it out. Speaking of which, Red King finds them. Pigmon tries to reason with Red King and gets squished for its troubles. Cap wakes up Hayata and tells him to find the others.
SOS 信号だ。キャップ、行ってください。よし、じっとしておれよ。すぐ迎えに来る。はい。
He manages to reach his capsule, which is stuck between two boulders, and transforms. In Episode 9, Lightning Operation, a terrible typhoon strikes a town called Unari. The damage is substantial, even the bridge is gone. A crew of workers later spot a monster rise from the ground. It's uranium monster Gavora. The crew deploys to stop it from reaching another town which has a nuclear power plant. As you could guess from its name, it has a taste for uranium and wants more nuclear power. The crew hatch a plan to bait the monster away with a piece of uranium via helicopter. Hayata volunteers to pilot the helicopter, but surprise, Fuji and Hoshino stow away in the chopper. Like I said, they do this a lot. Hoshino tries to be a backseat driver. You want to fly this thing? Ide discovers that Gavora emits radiation when it eats, so they have to get it as far away from humans as possible. Hayata tries to drop the uranium to save some nearby kids, but gets hung up and Gavora grabs onto it, crashing the helicopter. Thankfully, he gets up and moves just before getting stepped on. He then rides Gavora like a bucking bronco. Yippee-ki-yay! He then tears off the big pedals on Gavora's neck and he convulses, then falls to the ground. I guess he had a brain hemorrhage or blood clot or something. Who knows? Weird ending. In Episode 10, The Mysterious Dinosaur Base, a mad scientist plans to unleash a new monster, Jirus. Meanwhile, in Kitayama Lake, the fish population has grown exponentially, so naturally the crew is called in to check it out. This time they take the VTOL and the S-Submarine 21. Arashi in the sub investigates under the sea and finds nothing. Cap decides to be nice and lets the crew have some shore leave, even though they didn't find diddly. Ide and a reporter named Fubo go to interview Professor Nakayama, who reveals his evil plan and holds them at gunpoint, destroying Ide's communicator. Nakayama says that he and a colleague of his, Nakaido, investigated the Loch Ness years ago, where Nakaido reportedly died. Ever since then, our mad scientist here has been working on Jirus for 15 years. Cap and Fuji make their way to the lake as Ide tries to fix his communicator. Fuji spots Jirus rising out of the lake, so they land. Meanwhile, the prof runs to the lake to see his creation in action. The mad scientist tries to stop them from hurting his creation, and Cap says he's crazy. No kidding! Hayata tells them that he should study them like Professor Nakaido. But plot twist, turns out he was Professor Nakaido all along. In his madness, he runs toward Jirus, who promptly tramples him. Well, there's your Frankenstein symbolism. Creator killed by its creation. Ide gets his communicator fixed and tells the others where he is. Once they save him, Hayata slips away and transforms into Ultraman. Ultraman motions to Jirus to bring it on, and for the first time we hear Ultraman's most iconic sound ever, which will become known for years to come, his swatch! Swatch! Ultraman rips off his neck wattles, and this really pisses off Jirus. He tries to gore our hero, but Ultraman just plays Matador with him, and oh my god! Zilla! Look at the scales, look at the tail! It's unmistakably the Big G! Okay, turn that off. As you may have guessed, this is indeed a reused Godzilla suit from 1964. So this, and any subsequent reuses aside, is probably the closest to a proper Godzilla vs. Ultraman fight as we're ever gonna get, Toku Faithful. Ultraman wins with a new move, the Ultra Slash. Yes, that's what it's called. then returns Jirus's frills to him and leaves. Well, that was nice of him. That's the first 10 episodes of Ultraman down. Come back next time for more Monster Mayhem, another Magic Stone, a 7,000-year-old mummy, and the return of an old nemesis. And I'll see you in the land of light.
What a man, what a man, what a man, what a mighty good man. Say it again now. What a man, what a man, what a man, what a mighty good man. Yes, he is.
嵐君。
待ってました。
嵐君。
は。
君は優秀な科学特捜隊員だ。
あ、僕もそう思っております。
ただし。
はあ。しまった。